Did you hear about our new sponsor, Learn It? One of the best ways to support your team is by investing in their growth through practical learning experiences. And that's exactly what Learn It delivers. Their short, live workshops focus on the essential human skills we all need, like empowering others, managing change, and team collaboration. As a Speak with People listener, you get a free 45-day trial for up to 20 people. Start today by heading to learnit.com/speakwithpeople or click the link in the show notes and start your journey to investing in providing great growth for your team. Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organizations. Each and every episode, we sit down with experts from various fields from around the world, just like you're grabbing a coffee with them, to dive into real, practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So go grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, have you ever walked away from a conversation realizing you weren't really listening and you were just waiting for your turn to talk? Or maybe you thought you were listening, but as you walked away, you realized you cannot remember anything that was said. Well, today we're going to dive into all things listening, and we are talking with a deep expert in listening skills. He is the author of a phenomenal book, How to Listen. Very grateful. He sent me a few copies ahead of time and was able to read his book. And we're going to be able to give away some to you, our listeners. But he's here to show us why listening and really not speaking is the most underrated leadership superpower. And so, if you want to earn trust, build deeper relationships, increase your influence, this episode is a must listen. Oscar is a tremendous leader. I could go through his entire resume. It would absolutely blow you away, but I want to get to you meeting him. Oscar, thank you so much for being on the Speak with People podcast, and welcome.
G'day, Jason. Looking forward to listening to you too.
I love it. Now, remind me where, because I think are we on different parts of the globe as we film this?
Yeah, I'm actually a day ahead of you, but unfortunately, I can't tell you what the lottery numbers are.
Absolutely. One of those back to the future type situations. Well, I love
Yeah,
it.
so I'm coming out of Sydney, Australia.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, hey, before we hop in, why don't we take some time, share a little bit of us with our listeners, your story, who you are, what you do, what's kind of got you to the place, what you do now.
April 2008, I'm sitting in a boardroom meeting in Sydney, Australia. It's a video conference. We've got people in Seattle, Washington State. We've got people in Singapore. And we're setting the annual budget for Microsoft in Australia. And it's about 18 people all doing very unnatural things to spreadsheets to try and do the dance and the negotiation that is the budget setting process. It's supposed to go for 90 minutes. And 20 minutes into this meeting, my boss, my vice president, sitting in the room in Sydney, looks me straight in the eye and she says, "Oscar, we need to talk immediately after this meeting." Now, Jason, I don't know about you, but when you get the honey, we need to talk kind of
Uh-huh.
moment,
Mm.
I did not listen to the rest of that budget meeting. I took out a pen, my notepad, and I wrote down how many weeks of salary I thought I had left and who are the 5 people I need to call to get a job.
Wow. Wow.
The meeting finished a little bit early actually, and as everybody moved out, I tried to escape, and Tracy said to me, "Hey, Oscar, please close the door. What I have to say to you is really important." And as I closed the door after everyone left, I kind of started walking back towards this huge boardroom table, and I was about halfway there, and she said, "You have no idea what you did at the 20-minute mark, do you?" And I thought, "Oh, I'm getting fired and I don't even know why." I sat down, and what she was about to say to me was very profound. But what was going through my head is, I'm getting fired, I'm getting fired, I'm getting fired. So for leaders out there, what you say And what people hear goes through a filter, and you don't know what that is. So we're going to give you some tips later on to check in on that. Now back to the table. I sit down, I look Tracy in the face, and she says, Oscar, if you could code how you listen, you could change the world. What I heard was, woohoo, I've still got a job. I've still got a job. And the only thing I could blurt out to Tracy in that moment, Jason, was, do you mean code or code? Like, do you want me to write a paper? It's like, she said, Oscar, we work at Microsoft, code, software. So wind the clock forward a decade and a half. We've coded how to listen in an assessment tool. We've coded how to listen in 3 books. We've coded how to listen in the jigsaw puzzle games, consulting, and a whole bunch of other things. And the difference between hearing and listening is the action you take. So hopefully I've honored Tracy by coding how to listen.
Wow. Wow. My goodness. I love that. I love that you took us right into the story and used it to draw us in and teach us that valuable
What was
lesson.
going through your mind while you were listening to that?
Oh, I'm trying to figure out, yeah, if you still had a job, if you were going to start searching, what was going to be the, the next step for you. So I love that. One of the things I loved, even about our pre-work to schedule this interview, is you sent me a really, I mean, the first guest who has sent me kind of a, for me at the time, kind of an outside the box idea. It shouldn't have been outside the box, but typically when I work with a guest, I say, hey, what's your passion area? Here's who our listeners are. Does that area fit? And what I loved about you is you said, hey, I've got this idea. Why don't you ask your listeners? And we have a Facebook group of 1,200 leaders from around the world. And so we were able to put information in there and say, hey, we've got this great podcast interview coming up with an expert. What would you? And so we were able to incorporate some of those questions into today's conversation. And I love that. That was spectacular. So leading off into that,
Yeah,
why do you,
and
yeah, go ahead.
and listening happens before, during, and after the conversation. Too many people think listening is just in the moment. You can create a very productive, spacious, effective container for communication by just doing a little bit of work beforehand. And the important part of that conversation is not that I ask the question to you in advance, and it's not that it's out of the box. It's, who are we here to serve in this conversation? It's not Jason and Oscar. It's those of you who are listening right now. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we want to pose the question from a context of what's in service of them. Too many agendas are item A, item B, item C, and forget about ultimately what we're trying to do. So, what's the one question you could pose to someone you're meeting with in the next 24 hours? Like, what will make it a good conversation? And you'll have a very different conversation because you have planted a little thought in their subconscious, and they don't even know they're thinking about how to have a better conversation because their subconscious is working while they sleep, while they shower, while they drive. And when they arrive at the conversation, you're probably going to have a higher quality conversation.
Wow. I love that. What's interesting is as you were breaking that down, I remembered the first time I got the email, and one of my, I don't know if it's a fatal flaw as a leader, but it's definitely something I need to work on, is just the speed of what I consume. And so I read the email and, kind of moved on. And I think it was a day later that it finally hit me. Oh, wait a minute. And so, wait a minute. Let me let me back up. So can we start there with speed? Why do you think so many of us, because I know I'm not alone in that, but so many of us, we just rush through the conversation. We want them to rush so they could finish speaking so then we could add, or maybe we don't read the email, entirely before we shoot something off. How can you help us walk through the speed at which we listen?
You want a dirty little secret, Jason?
Absolutely.
There are people who are listening to us at 2 times speed.
Yeah,
Right? Does that make
that's
the
so
point?
great. That's it.
So let's unpack why.
Yeah.
It's like for many of us, whether it's YouTube or Audible or podcast catcher, or if you're in financial services, you have to do regular compliance training. And if you have a on the ball kind of people and culture, human resources compliance team, you can't change the speed at which that video is being played. But for most, you can change the speed of your compliance training and get through it a lot quicker because you can hear much faster than I can talk. Let me give you a couple of numbers. Average speaking speed range 125 to 150. If I'm calling a horse race or auctioning a property, I'm speaking about 200 words per minute. You can still understand everything I say at 200 words per minute. Now, that varies if the accent is unfamiliar or the content is unfamiliar, but you can probably go up to 2.5, some people even up to 3 times speed with their eyes closed with limited distraction. They can still comprehend everything that's being said at that faster speed. And the reason is you can listen at up to 400 words per minute.
Wow.
So there's this massive differential at the speed at which we listen and the speed at which they can speak. And
Right.
what happens in that gap is we jump ahead, we anticipate, we solve, we interrupt, we drift away. There's many things that get in our way when we listen, but the number one thing is if you're aware of this speed differential, all of a sudden you can stop trying to worry about jumping ahead, drifting away, solving the problem. You can use that extra bit of time just to start to listen to how are they saying it? Are they talking about the past or the present or the future? Are they talking about it as a problem or are they talking about it as a solution? Are they talking about it from a position of I or are they talking about it from a position of we? Are they talking about it inside the organization or outside the organization? All these other things are clues you want to be moving to listening to if you want to start to build your listening muscle a little bit further. Yet, as potent as those numbers are, and I know you went, wow, the number that matters the most is none of those numbers. Here's the number that matters the most. I want to move you from the listener's perspective to the speaker's perspective. From a speaker's perspective, they can speak between 125 and 150 words per minute. And they can think in a range from 600 to 1600 words per minute. And on average, it's about 900 words per minute.
Mm.
So let me say that again. You can think at 900 words per minute, but you can say 125. Let
Wow.
me say it in a completely different way. You can only say what you think. It's 14% of what's on your mind. So it takes a while to move from what you say to what you think to what you mean. Now, I'm not talking about a keynote from the stage. You rehearse, you craft your story, you build a metaphor, you take the audience on a journey. You still have to be conscious of their listening speeds. If you're in a conversation in a team meeting or you're in a client meeting for the very first time, the first thing they say is 14% of what they think and what they mean. If you
Mm.
flip it, you're not hearing 86% of what they think if all you do is actively listen to the very first thing they say. Good
Wow.
listeners hear what's said, great listeners notice what's not said.
Ooh. Wow.
How does that show up for you, Jason, when you're going to see a new client for the first time?
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I was thinking about when you said that was, especially in the client situation, I was with a group of executives, and a manager comes up and says, all of this communication skills is great, but I've got so many meetings in a day and I am late for each one and I rush through it and I don't even remember what they say. And they were looking for help. And I was thinking through, like, okay, what's the most, practical way to help? Because their clients know exactly that they're rushed, that they're not all the way there, that they're they're disengaged. And so as leaders, obviously we need to take a step back and learn whatever skills we can to make sure we're as present as possible, especially for our clients. And being on time, scheduling more time to be able to get there. All of those things are helpful, but wanting to be as present as possible. That's what I was thinking about. Ooh, that's so important.
And your presence as a listener will have more impact than any question or statement you make. That's definitely, we know that from 35,000 people in our research database. People can listen in complete silence, and the other person thinks it's high quality listening than a bunch of machine gun questions about the content they're talking about. As a leader, you're in control. The more senior you are, the more control you have of the calendar that you run. And the calendar you run this is a boring, practical, basic thing. If you're sending out the meeting request, start at 5 after the hour and finish at 5 before the hour. That's a very clear signal, not just to you and to them. A, you value the time, but B, you're creating this buffer. Now, you can't do it for every meeting, but you can start to create a sense of space. Because here's what happens. If you start a meeting at the top of the hour and it's a team meeting and you've got 6 people in your team, at the top of the hour, 3 people are there and you. And then a minute after the hour, the next person comes in, and then the last person arrives at 5 after the hour. Jason, I'm really sorry I'm late. I just come from a meeting. It was a client issue. We had to deal with that escalation, but I'm here now. Yet, can you hear the state of their voice and the anxiety and everything else? And that's washing over the team. As opposed to the identical meeting, that same person arrives at 5 after the hour, but the meeting's scheduled at 5 after the hour. And they go, great, Jason, I really look forward to coming to these meetings because I've got a bit of time to breathe. Let's go. Now, everyone's still there at 5 after the hour, but you've created a beautiful, productive container for them to do that. And whether that's an external meeting or an internal meeting, whether that's meeting with a peer, if you're controlling the calendar, that's you're setting the appointment, just do that. That simple little thing will, with the clients I work
Wow.
with, particularly the actuaries in financial services who are very precise, they always say to me the first time this meeting request comes in is like, Oscar, could you explain 5 after the hour? And with some people, it's 7 after the hour because the more senior you are, the more likely they're going to be running over time, by the way. Um, but 5 after the hour, and particularly with actuaries who don't think in numbers, they think in formulas and Greek alphabets and things like that. They're very logical, sequential things. And when I explain to them, hey, this is what I'm doing, they go, oh, you really must value your time. And I say, no, I actually really value yours. And we're
Wow.
actually going to finish 5 minutes earlier as well. Now, when people arrive to the second meeting and the third and the fourth, they'll say things like, love your meetings. I get time to have a glass of water. I have time to visit the restroom. I have time to get a sandwich. But I look forward to your meetings because they're a little bit different. Is it really different? No. And by the way, whatever software you're using to set your calendar appointment, you can default it that way. So you don't even have to think about it when you set those things up.
Wow. Boy, I love that. Just even,
Can,
yeah, just little
can,
tweaks.
can you think of a situation you might be doing that in the next 72 hours, Jason, where you might just shave a few minutes off the beginning and end of a meeting you're going to send out?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I uh I was already starting to think about which one I could try that with this week by the end of the week here. I've got a few that I can.
Yeah. And I think for everyone listening, Jason beautifully displayed what happens when he's got 400 words per minute he can listen in on. So the minute I mentioned the tip, guess where he was going? He's going straight into solution mode. He's going into solving. It doesn't make it right or wrong, but it makes it human. So remember, if you're pitching a new idea to a client or trying to get them to improve their saving or investment approach, they'll be thinking about what it means to them, not necessarily what you're saying. And if you can move to listening and hearing not just what they say, but what they think and mean, they'll feel seen, they'll feel heard, they'll feel valued. And as a result, they'll become your unpaid sales force because they'll refer you to other people.
Wow. And that's just huge. I mean, sometimes I think we get stuck in this rut where we think my expertise, my knowledge, the product that I'm bringing, but our clients, and even our team, the better we are at listening, hearing them, hearing the things that they don't say, and being there for them. Wow, that will develop uh, them wanting to tell other people without us even asking.
Yeah, and if you struggle recruiting staff, as an example, one of the things you can differentiate yourself on is, if you're really listening to your team, they will also become an unpaid referral source to you. And one of the things when I was at Microsoft, I never had a problem building a recruitment funnel for new roles because people would know from other staff members, like, we're a little different in our team. Our team meetings take place in the contact center, and we have to listen to the customers for an hour before we go into the team meeting. And then we have to talk about what we heard. When we brief our advertising agencies, Oscar doesn't do it with a PowerPoint. He takes them into the data center and they start to hear the sounds of the machines in there, but more importantly, they feel how cold it is. And again, think deliberately. It's like, yeah, is a coffee shop an obvious place to have a conversation? Yeah. Could you change it up a little every now and again? Probably. Will it be memorable? Yes. But we're not doing it for our own purpose to be memorable. We're doing it so they can create a sense of place when they think about the piece of work they're trying to do or the decision they're trying to make and think about it in a really different way.
Don't just hope for better client conversations. Equip yourself for them. The Speak with Your Client series is live from April 14th to May 30th, packed with powerful tools to help you build trust and close more deals without being salesy. Catch expert led podcasts, weekly blogs, live webinars on Mondays, and grab your free copy of the High Trust Sales Playbook. Make sure you're following Speak with People on all the socials. Join the speakers group on Facebook or the Speak with Your Client LinkedIn group just for the series. Don't miss a moment. Everything's waiting for you at speakwithpeople.com/speak with your client. Your next client is counting on it. Okay, we talked about speed and impatience. Are there other mistakes, roadblocks, listening villains that sometimes we allow, to kind of disrupt our process, our listening, and how do we get to the place where we overcome them?
Yeah, look, in our database, we have about 35,000 people who are
Wow.
workplace listeners who've taken this assessment. So we have a lot of data to know what are the four most common barriers to what gets in the way when people listen. So the obvious one is people wanting to interrupt. The next one is people who are lost and drifting away. They're not sure why they should attend the meeting, or they're in the meeting and they're not sure of their role in the meeting. We have problem solvers who don't interrupt. So
Mm.
they're jumping ahead and they're trying to problem solve. So you did a beautiful illustration of that a little bit earlier on, and that's okay. And the final one is the people who move the spotlight off the speaker and onto them. They're trying to create connection, but what they're doing is the speaker thinks, or at least the speaker says in our research, they're making it all about them, and it's not helpful. So we call them the dramatic listener, the interrupting listener, the lost listener, and the shrewd listener.
Mm.
And all four of them have a different orientation to the way they listen. Now, if you visit listeningquiz.com, you can take the assessment yourself. It takes 7 minutes. You'll get a report. It outlines 3 tips that are tailored to your listening profile, and you can take the steps to becoming a better leader. These are all common in English speaking workplaces. This assessment isn't available in any other language, although we've had people asking us for French and Spanish versions of that. So, which one of those villains do you relate to the most, Jason?
Well, for sure, the problem solver. So
Yeah.
I'm trying not to, jump ahead, and you're trying to do that. And then honestly, at times I drift. I get lost. It feels like if I don't get a little bit more control over this, the shorter my attention span gets. And I've got to put this far away if I'm going to stay focused. And
Hmm.
so I drift. I mean, especially if I'll be, hope this doesn't sound rude, especially if the person that I'm listening to, and I love sitting one on one with people, but especially if they're not clear, if they haven't thought through what they're saying, if they don't know how to tell a story. You open this up with, a I've interviewed 200 plus folks. A good amount still goes into their story part with, well, I've done this for so long and this. You went right into the problem, casted the vision, took us right inside the room. I mean, that's memorable. So the drifting one, I could definitely relate to.
So I want to be helpful because other people will relate to you, Jason. And by the way, Jason held up his phone for those of you who are
Mm,
listening only, and
thank you.
the phone said, "Speak with people, not at people, or with two people." I couldn't quite see because it was on the edge of my screen. Um, People often think that interrupting in workplace conversations is rude or wrong or unproductive. Couldn't be further from the truth.
Uh,
Skillful and impactful interruption is helpful for you, for them, their thinking, and others present if it's a group meeting. Now, the reason people tell really long, elongated stories, yes, part of that skill. Part of it may also be they're repeating the story in a variation. And again, that's because ironically they don't feel heard. They're repeating the story over and over again because nobody's ever actually listened to them. So a simple thing for you to consider, Jason, this is an invitation for you to practice this. They're in this soliloquy of 15 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever is too long for you. It could be 2 minutes, to be honest. Um, hey, Jason, I'm curious if you were to summarize that in just a sentence. And you have to use a little bit of skill here to pick which one you want to do. Hey, Jason, if that was the subject line of an email, what would it say? And you will get them to do this. They will
wow.
pause. They will either take a deep breath in, or their shoulders and head will go up and back, or they'll look to the side as they consider what you've said. And then guess what they'll say? They'll say, now that I think about it, it's blah, whatever that abbreviation is. And you have moved from what they say to what they think to what they mean. And you're not doing it for you. You're actually doing it for them. You're doing it to help them crystallize, synthesize, and get very precise in the language they use to describe their thinking. because no one's ever offered them that opportunity, it's actually quite helpful for them. They don't think it's rude. It's like, Jason's told me to shorten it. Okay, I haven't really thought about shortening it. And all of a sudden, we're now both communicating on the same frequency, and your drift to their talk ratio has gone from really high to really low. So if you imagine two waves kind of intersecting, you're
Mm.
starting to get on the same frequency. And we can only communicate effectively when we're on the same frequency. So, an invitation to summarize either through, hey, what would it be as a subject line in an email, or a helpful one if you're in any kind of sales situation is often, hey, Jason, if you would explain this to your CFO next time you bumped into them in a sentence or two, what would you say?
Oh,
If
yeah.
you had to explain this to your life partner, your spouse, your, your wife, how would you summarize this conversation in a few words or a few sentences? Then you've heard what they heard, not what you said,
Wow.
because communication only happens when we get those frequencies balanced. Too many of us spend a lot of time talking, asking questions, but we never really understand what they heard. Never ask that question as you're walking out the door or in the elevator or just before you click finish on your video conference. Try and do it in the last 25% of the meeting rather than the last 5% of the meeting. Why? They'll say, well, this is how I explain it to the CFO. Jason's got a product that's probably too expensive for us. It does more than everything we require. But if you do that in the last 25%, you've got the opportunity to recover, as opposed to um, Jason's got a really well thought through offering. It will be one of the three I recommend to you. And you've got the opportunity then to just make the meeting shorter because you know they're going to do a great job of transmitting your idea inside their
Wow.
organization.
Wow.
Probably one
Goodness.
you can actually use yourself, Jason,
Yeah,
in your work life, right?
absolutely. Oh, I was just thinking, I mean, so profoundly practical, to be able to,
Mm.
you know, take something right away and put it right into, my next call or the next meeting. I mean, just absolutely huge, absolutely huge. Where did for you? Where did this passion develop and come from? Was it your years working for a giant organization and seeing all the different levels? Was it, something close to home? Would love to know, where this was birthed in you.
Look, there was lots of fuel that was laid out in my early life. I'm the son of two first generation migrants. I worked on building sites from the age of 5. I wouldn't be allowed to do so today because of health and safety and all kinds of things like that. No concept of hard hats or anything like that.
Right.
And on the job site, I was responsible for the lunch orders, and not everyone's English was great, so you had to get away with hand signs and pointing and all kinds of kind of variations on the language. I went to school with 25 nationalities and learned to play card games against teams who were playing in Spanish and Lithuanian and Polish and Vietnamese. Part of it was the fact I had a huge jaw, as like a werewolf protruding jaw, and I had braces for a lot longer than everybody else. So I didn't want the attention on myself. So I got really good at questions.
Huh.
Ultimately, it was Tracy, and
Hmm.
Tracy asked and noticed something about the way I was asking questions. So, by the way, I've been asking questions like the ones I was asking in that meeting for decades. It was her listening. It was her noticing. It was her sensing what it meant to me. Now, I didn't leave Microsoft for another 5 years after that before I started this quest to 100 million deep listeners in the workplace. But they're all the chapters in a book you might write if you were writing a book about me.
And so, is that your objective? 100 million deep listeners in the workplace.
I call it a quest. An objective means you know how you're going to get there. An objective implies that you know. I don't. I know that one thing I've had to adapt, thanks to Dermot. Dermot and I were sitting down in 2015. It's like Dermot's Irish and he's got a beautiful accent. I'm not going to pretend to do it, but I was complaining to Dermot. It's like nobody reads my newsletters, Dermot. Nobody opens them. You know, why am I bothering? And he just said, you idiot. You're talking about listening, then get a podcast. And I went the other way and just went on other people's podcasts and figured that for 1 unit of my time, everybody, including you, Jason, are able to spread the message much faster than I can ever do by myself. So one of the questions I always ask myself is, for this unit of time I'm investing, is it a unit of time that's just useful to one person, or is it going to help to influence a system, an organization, to create this movement around 100 million deep listeners in the workplace? We do some really rough calculations. We're about 15 million in, about a decade on. I'm pretty
Wow.
happy with that.
Wow.
I'm not beating myself up about the missing 85 million. That a good friend of mine, Matt, who asked me once, well, what am I seeking to achieve? He always said, if you can achieve it in your lifetime, it's not worth stretching for. So he invited me to think about being much more ambitious in the legacy of the idea and creating all the various documents, artifacts, software assessments, and jigsaw puzzle games and the like to help others become better listeners.
Well, from my research and going through everything that you've put out, I've been blown away, and I can't wait to share it with our listening community and with as many leaders as I can, because this is so key. Let me, as we kind of wrap our conversation, let me ask you this. So you're listening, you're sitting with a client or a friend or a team member, and you're listening. What I hear a lot from people over the years. Well, I'm not good with names. I'm not good with remembering, things. How do we capture what we listen? Are there practical ways to do that? Are there a different hierarchy of what we need to remember? Walk us through, how important that is, because the next conversation, when you recall something that they said, it's like the fireworks goes off for them. And so how important is that?
Look, I'm no memory expert, so I interviewed world memory champions from World Memory Olympics. Did you know there was such a thing, Jason, as a World Memory Olympics? Well, it's a
Wow.
thing. Dr. Boris Conrad, a gold medalist in a couple of Olympics. When I spoke to him, he said, if you're taking notes, try and avoid being the courtroom stenographer and take verbatim notes. Try as often as possible to take visual notes where you're drawing very rudimentary shapes that mean something to you, and you might
Wow.
point arrows in connections with that, which kind of reinforced an example where I interviewed a Supreme Court judge and he used a tree as a descriptor for the case. The key arguments are the trunk, the arguments feeding in the branches, and some relative facts became the leaves. And these sketches or diagrams that this judge has done is stored in the National Library as well, so people can see how they do that. The point is simple. Avoid trying to script everything in the notes. You might write a
Mm.
word, like you might write unsaid question mark. You might write 400 words per minute. You might write 5 minutes later for booking a meeting. you might write all these things. So that helps with the note taking. One of the things when we talk to neuroscientists is to be aware, if you take a pen or a stylus or a keyboard out, when you're taking that note and you're doing verbatim, you are literally talking to yourself, shutting down the auditory pathway to listening effectively. So whilst you're note taking, sometimes you're incapable of listening to the other person if you're taking extraordinarily detailed notes.
Mm,
So sometimes the most effective thing to do, because in some professions you do have to capture significant or meaningful detail, is, Jason, could you just pause there for a moment? Look, what you said is really important, and I just want to take a note if you're okay with that. Now, be careful in sales. That can come across as false flattery, and
sure.
it could be perceived as disingenuous. But if you're in a profession that has high compliance, if you're in financial services, if you're in the medical field, if you're in those professions that take briefs like legal, like accounting, sometimes you do have to do that. Now, of course, there are modern technologies where you don't have to worry about any of that, because if you're on a video conference or the like, you can just hit record. And by the way, some conversations online you have to record legally, especially when you contact the call centers. In face-to-face conversations and making memorable names is, Dr. Boris Conrad would always say, find an adjective to describe that name.
Mm,
So my granddaughter's name is Ruby, but you'll remember it better if I say Red Ruby.
mm.
So in your mind, you go, okay, it's Red Ruby, so I've got an additional association with them. By the way, when you're meeting the person, hi, Jason, it's great to meet you. Say their name as quickly as possible.
Mm.
And for me, when I listen to your back catalogue of episodes, by the way, Jason, you only have 2% of episodes talking about listening in your back catalogue. Just saying. Um,
Okay.
you're Jolly Jason to me, right? That's how I remember your name, Jolly
Mm,
Jason, because you have this energy level that I associate with Jolly. So that's how I remember your name.
that's wonderful. 2%. Oof. That's we'll 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 do some work on that. I love that.
Well, you got to remember your podcast is speak with people, but I sense it's about communication. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Eh,
And if you look at Google searches, people searching for speaking training versus listening training, you'll see those same ratios. About 2% of people are searching for listening training versus speaking training. So
absolutely.
that, don't feel bad.
I love it. I love it. Okay, I've got a couple of rapid fire questions to ask you, but before I do, I'm just so curious from all of your time at Microsoft, do you got my Google products when I sent them over? Is it hard for you now to use Google after being at Microsoft for so long, or was that I'm sort of joking, but uh, what do you think about all the Google products?
I'm fascinated about this assumption, and one of the things when you're listening to the competitors is if you ignore their products, you're going to be in a hurt locker.
Mm,
Uh, I'm I'm teaching people how to use those products. Like, by the way, did you know you could put a table of contents in here in the Google Doc? And people go, I was like, oh, how do you know that? It's like, at Microsoft, you had to know the competitors' products as well as yours. So for
oh,
me, leaving Microsoft and doing Google Docs and all of that it wasn't like, oh, where is the this button or where is the that button?
sure.
No, they're great products. They they do great work, and whether it's Google or Office 365 or whatever you use. Um, Ultimately, it's about how productive can you be
Right.
using all of that. And I mix and match. There are things that I know that can't be done in a Google Sheet that I can do in Excel, for example. And there are things that can't be done in Excel that I do in a Python script. So, you know, the answer to every problem isn't to have your blinkers on. It's what serves the task or the project in the most effective way to do it. And a little hat tip to you and your team, that the workflows and the documentation that you've created in advance is putting you in the 1% of people I've been on podcasts as well.
Oh,
So it well done on your workflow.
well, thank you. Thank you. I've learned a ton from you because I'm finishing up my first book, Speak with People, Not at Them. And just watching how you've organized your book, how the link that you sent as a podcast guest with all of the information, everything right there. I mean, I was just blown away. I was just blown away. I loved it. So thank you.
Yeah,
So
it's ultimately about making it really easy for the people listening. So that's what we want to create.
I love that. So we're building an online communication library where we ask all of our guests 3 rapid fire questions because we hope that these conversations, they spark something in people. And so we have this great resource where people can go to get kind of new ideas and resources. But we do talk about speaking on this podcast quite frequently. Is there a favorite speaker that you have? Somebody that you'd highly recommend every time you hear them, you would recommend us going to listen to them. Who would that speaker be?
Yeah, I would recommend Matthew Dix from Storyworthy. He does a spectacular job of creating and telling stories. He's won the Moth competition multiple years in the United States, and he is an amazing person at explaining and deconstructing how he builds his speeches as well. So Matthew Dix taught me everything about the story I told you about, Tracy.
I love it. And former Speak with People podcast guest. And so we'll tag that episode as well. Speaking of podcasts, you've been on a ton. We're not all
Mm.
podcast listeners, but if you are, is there a guilty pleasure or a development podcast that you just keep going back to that you highly recommend?
I would recommend Robbie Kalman Baxter's subscription stories, not because everybody can turn their business into a subscription business, but if you're struggling to understand the key drivers of loyalty and repeat business in whatever business you're in, consulting, financial services, hospitality, Robbie not only interviews great guests and has written amazing books on the topic, but really simple, practical tips about how to treat a first time guest in a restaurant different from a second time guest in a restaurant.
Oh, I love it. And then lastly, is there a book you would highly recommend every leader needs to read? The leader's about to spend time on a desert island. They can only take one book. What would that book be?
I would recommend The Tower and the Square by Neil Ferguson. He's
Mm.
a historical economist, and it talks about how power structures change over time. The tower is the hierarchy, the square is the network, and he talks about that way back to Greek and Egyptian times and its influence on economic growth and development. And it's as relevant today as it was back in ancient Greece as well.
Ooh, I love it. Last question for you. We use the phrase speak with your client, not at them. As
Mm.
you hear that phrase, process it, what's the first kind of thought that comes to mind? What's the first thing that you hear when you hear that phrase?
Honestly, I was like, wow, so what's all this speak bias all about? And when we think about the 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 binary you've set up there, I would say what I think about is how does that work in one-on-one situations, group situations, and ballroom situations? Because I sense there's a nuance in each of those. So I'm just curious how you do that in bigger audiences rather than smaller audiences. That's what it's got me thinking.
Oh, I love that. I love it. Well, where can we send our listeners? We will make sure we tag your book, How to Listen, in the show notes, in our Facebook group. Where's the best place for them to find you online?
I don't want you to find me online. I want you to discover your own listening. So go to listeningquiz.com and
Mm.
connect with your own listening and improve your listening. I'm not about me, I'm about you. And when you get your report, you'll be able to connect with me in the document. It'll show you how to connect with me from there. But listeningquiz.com, go and spend 7 minutes and make an investment that'll pay back in a lifetime of better communication. Not only when you listen, but also when you speak. The hardest position in listening is actually the speaker's position, not the listener's.
Wow. Well, Oscar, I cannot thank you enough. This was absolutely brilliant. Thank you for just opening up your wisdom and sharing with such generosity. So appreciate you being on the Speak with People podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Speak with People podcast. It means the world to us when you share this episode. Thanks for liking, subscribing, or following the podcast. That really does help the podcast get into more ears and into more leaders listening. Also, don't forget, we have 2 exciting resources for you. The first is go to Facebook and join the Speakers Group. This is a community designed for leaders who want to grow their communication skills. Also, go to speakwithpeople.com/skills library to access the Communication Skills Library. It is an online resource chock filled with resources that will inspire you and transform you and grow your communication skills. Thanks again for being a part of the listening community. We cannot wait for the next episode.